Hi, my name's Natalie. I'm going to be teaching, I taught my husband actually earlier today, and I'm going to be reviewing what we went over for chapter 6, which is torts. And I found this chapter particularly interesting because I own a business, I own a grocery store, and so a lot of these things are very familiar to me already, and I learned a lot more in depth about each one of them. Um, so we'll get right into it. So a tort involves seeking compensation for harm caused, whereas a crime involves punishment by the government. So there's three different types of torts. There's intentional neglect and strict liability, and we just focus on the two first ones for this class. An intentional tort is an action done on purpose to cause harm or to offend somebody. So an example is assault and battery. Assault is threatening harm or causing fear of harm. Battery is unwanted, harmful, or offensive contact. So the assault would be the swing of the punch, and then if you make contact, that's the battery. The defenses for this could be consent was given, or self-defense if you were defending against an attack on yourself, but it has to be equal to that same level of attack. So you can't claim self-defense if someone comes to punch you and you shoot them. So the next one is defamation, which is intentional false statements harming someone's reputation. So statements must be facts, not opinions. And the defenses of that are truth, if there's actual truth, and then privileged statements. The next one is invasion of privacy, and this protects reasonable expectation of privacy. It includes appropriation of name likeness, public disclosure of private facts, intrusion, or seclusion. The next is intentional infliction of emotional distress, and that could be has to be causing extreme distress through outrageous conduct. And then the level of distress would require physical symptoms in order to prove fault with that. A nuisance, that would be unlawful interference with enjoyment of property or life. So it must be unreasonable interference. So it takes into consideration things like where the person lives or their natural surroundings. So an example of this would be a dog barking or kids screaming in a neighborhood. That's a reasonable expectation of a neighborhood with homes and young families. So you're not going to win a lawsuit for that because it's reasonably expected that that level of noise would exist. Another one is intentional interference with contractual relations. So that's encouraging someone to breach a contract, requires knowing about the contract, and then causing injury with that knowledge. The last one is fraudulent misrepresentation. So that's using deceit for personal or business gain. And there's 5 elements to that. It's knowing the misrepresentation, you had intent to deceive, reliance, damages, and correlation to the injury. Moving on to the next portion, which is negligence. That's the next kind of tort we're going to discuss. And negligence is considered unintentional. It's not intentional harm caused, but it's harm caused by avoiding to follow the proper procedures or safety procedures. So there's 4 elements for torts of negligence. So the first one is duty of care. So you have an obligation to act reasonably to avoid causing harm. So a reasonable person standard. So an example of that is one I'm really familiar with. That's a wet floor sign displayed at a business. So a reasonable person wouldn't know that the floor is wet by just walking in. But when they have the wet floor sign there, that's the business doing their due diligence in offering a warning that the floor is wet, because otherwise they wouldn't know that. And I have a personal example I'm going to share in just a second. Another example of this would be doctors will be found negligent for leaving a sponge in a patient after doing surgery, but a regular person that hasn't had that education wouldn't know to take things out like that. So they couldn't be held negligent because they wouldn't know, but a doctor has been trained and they would know better, so they could be sued for malpractice because they should know better than that because of their level of education and training. So back to the wet floor example, we had an incident just like this. So this was kind of my personal like aha moment in this. And so we have to be really diligent about training our staff on safety and making sure there's clear walkways, there's wet floor signs, you know, people can get around easily without causing harm. We did have a woman that came in and she tripped on a pallet that was on the end of an aisle. So she tripped and fell, and then took up a claim against our insurance company, and then claimed injury on her knee. Well, we went back and watched security videos, and some of the employees were like, I didn't remember her holding her knee. So after reviewing our security cameras and then passing that on to our insurance company, we saw that she was holding her hip. She actually fell on her hip. It wasn't her knee. And so our insurance company denied the claim, and then they were told that she would have to, you know, sue us on her own if she wanted to collect damages. And knowing that we had the video that kind of showed that it wasn't her knee that she fell on, she dropped the claim. So I thought that was interesting. The next portion of this is a breach. So a breach is failing to meet the duty of care. So you caused an injury. So an example of this would be a driver failing to obey traffic rules like stoplights. That would be in breach of safety driving rules. Causation. So that would require actual causation and proximate causation. Actual would be the breach caused the plaintiff to be injured because of the defendant's actions. And the proximate, the injury must have been foreseeable. And then the damages, the plaintiff must have suffered harm as a result of the defendant's actions, and they require compensation. The purpose of tort law is to provide compensation. So that's where the damages are determined. It's determined how much compensation that person is entitled to within reason. But that's what I learned about tort in the law, and I found it really interesting. So thanks for listening.